So welcome everyone to an Around the Block talk. Today we have with us Mr. Ishan Roy. So he's an industry veteran and has served in the leadership position of various firms and led many projects to successful completion. So he's currently the head of blockchain at Tamil Nadu e-governance agency, and so he's going to speak on blockchain and e-governance and how government are incorporating these new technologies. So very excited to hear from you, Ishan. I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining for the session. It's a pleasure to be here and talk a little bit about how governments are adopting blockchain and how TNEG is looking at adopting blockchain. So without further ado, let's get started. So just to give you a basic idea of the flow we'll be looking at today. So we'll start with why do governments really need blockchain anyway? Then we'll talk a little bit about how implementation of blockchain has evolved for governments. So what it used to be and what it is now. Third is blockchain for Tamil Nadu. How are we doing blockchain in Tamil Nadu? Our flagship project called Nambikayanam, and we'll talk a little bit about the other blockchain initiatives of TNAGA. So let's start with why do governments really need blockchain anyway, right? Because arguably governments are probably the most centralized organizations that exist in the world. So why do you need a decentralized infrastructure? Why do you need a decentralized structure? So something you need to understand is that within the curtain of government, so to say, governments are also essentially a lot of federated entities or a lot of federated bodies. So when you're sharing data or when you're sharing documents between these federated entities, you need to have a secure way of doing that, right? And you need to have a trusted layer that you can rely on while you are carrying out the transaction, as well as in the history also, whenever in the future also, whenever you need to do an audit or you want to check if a transaction was carried out correctly or if there's a dispute. So for reasons like this, the existence of a blockchain layer becomes extremely essential for implementing e-governance applications or e-governance platforms that are robust, secure, and that can serve the citizens better. So broadly, let's look at what type of use cases or what type of areas where governments are looking at for using blockchain technology. The first is securing digitized data and documents from internal and external risks, right? And for transparency and auditability. An example I like giving here is that the way you should look at digitized documents secured with blockchain is like they are a digital equivalent of data that is of something that is written on paper. So if I were to give you a paper certificate and I put a comment on that, you would have no way to remove it. And if let's say you had to do a copy of it also, at max to max, you would end up with a very badly looking facsimile. You wouldn't have the exact document. This is exactly what blockchain tries to do with digitized data and documents. So in a lot of government databases and in a lot of government data repositories, you have a lot of digitized data and documents that are there. But for purely, but if you need to use that data for carrying out decisions, that may not be perfect at all times because it doesn't have those properties of data that is printed on paper. If someone comes and changes the digitized data or the digitized document, generally speaking, I would have no way of finding out that this change has been done. So we need use blockchain technology to so that this digitized data has the same properties as any information that is printed on paper. Even if you do a single change, it will be captured as an audit log if it is done by an authorized party. And if you're an unauthorized party, you cannot change the digitized data. The second use case where governments are looking at blockchain is of seamless sharing of secure digitized assets and documents between various departments and agencies. So we call these paperless processes in the sense that you have the properties of digitized data similar to paper-based processes, but you can securely share it between the departments. And thus this data becomes very reliable. So a classic example is if you look at how land is bought in India today, so there are two processes. One is land registration, where there is something called land mutation, where the property title, the name of the property title changes from the buyer to the seller. or from the previous owner to the current owner, right? If let's say you are inheriting some land. So in India, these are carried out by two separate departments. So the registration department carries out the registration of the land transaction, whereas the changing of the title happens at the how it works is that you typically go, you do a land registration, you get your registration document, and then you take that as proof and go to the revenue department. You submit a request for getting the property mutated in your name, and then the process happens. So this is a very cumbersome process for the citizen. You could ideally do it just by sharing digitized data by APIs between the two departments. But then again, the question of security comes in. What if someone changes the data when it is in travel, or what if someone changes the data when it is at rest in one of these departments, right? Could be a rogue employee, could be a hacker. So for that purpose, blockchain plays an important role. Instead of putting it in a siloed database where it is at threat from various entities, you can secure it with blockchain and then securely share it with the other party. And in the future, if there's any dispute, you can come back to the blockchain and check what was the data recorded from source, right? So this makes seamless sharing of secure digitized assets and documents between departments very easy. The third is secure workflows for proactive delivery of services. This is something we are exploring. Now that departments are able to securely share data and documents between themselves, it also means that you can build automated workflows, or you can build systems that are able to deliver services and schemes to citizens proactively. So the reason we can do that is because now I have secured data in the blockchain. If let's say there's a scheme in which the data is taken from one department and the other department delivers it. So a classic example is when a child is born, he's typically registered with a municipal corporation body. But when ration is distributed, it is typically done through another department, which is like the civil supplies department. So you typically need these departments to engage with themselves so that the service can be delivered. So now that you have a secure layer on which you can share data and you can reliably trust that data in the future, you can now build automated workflows on top to proactively deliver these services to citizens. So if my kid is born, I no longer need to go in and put in a request to get him added to my ration card. Once the data is there in the blockchain, I can write an automated workflow for adding his name to the ration card. So the citizen does not need to come to the government. The government automatically delivers the service. The other important thing over here is that it could be argued that the automated workflow itself could be tampered by a malicious party, could be a rogue employee, could be a hacker. So using smart contracts, you can actually put the automated workflow itself within the blockchain, making sure that it always works that as it is intended. So be it a ration delivery scheme, be it an insurance scheme, be it some other scheme that benefits the citizens, be it the fact that after you pass your class 10th, you need to be issued a certificate. All of them can be converted into smart contracts and then implemented as secure workflows that cannot be tampered. And proactively, you can deliver a service to the citizen. They don't need to come to the government. They'll directly get their service delivered to them within the comfort of their homes. And the last major use case that governments are looking at is better identity and consent management and privacy preserving workflows using something known as zero knowledge proof. The idea here is essentially that if you look at current identity frameworks or the way identity verification happens right now, when you go to a third party for accessing a service, so for example, let's say you're going to a hotel to stay in a room for the night, or you're trying to go to a cyber cafe to access the internet for a few hours, typically the service provider will ask you to submit a paper copy document or a Xerox of your document, because he needs to do that. There's a regulation in place that says that you need to get this identity document from the person who's traveling, so that tomorrow if there's a law and order problem, that ID can be pulled out and the person can be traced, and whatever is a suitable procedure can happen. However, this is also a huge breach in privacy for the citizens. For example, in a lot of cases, we have seen these Xerox of Aadhaar or Xerox of PAN card, etc., that have been submitted to hotels and cyber cafes being misused, right? So just to meet the regulation, we have ended up with a framework which is harmful to the citizens from a privacy point of view. Something that blockchain allows us to do is that you can build privacy preserving workflows where you can share just very basic details about your background with the service provider, and you don't need to share the document with him, and on the basis of that the service will be given to you. So let's say I go to a hotel and I stay for the night in Bangalore. Instead of sharing Aadhaar, that person can make a request to a blockchain ID network built by the government, and the network will confirm that I am a resident of Chennai, and that information will be captured as an audit log on the blockchain. So I don't need to share my document. There's an audit log that is as good as a paper trail. And tomorrow, if there's a law and order dispute, anyone can come and check that ledger and confirm that yes, this is the transaction that actually happened. So the cyber cafe owner or the hotel owner is not lying. So this is a much better privacy preserving identity management workflow than what we have right now. The other thing is also capturing consent of the citizen when you are sharing data for any purpose, right? So today the consent management systems that we have, they are driven by Web2 and they're centralized, which means that consent, when you're capturing consent of the citizen, it can be tampered very easily and you can change a yes to a no. But with blockchain, if you capture consent for sharing data and documents from citizens, it can be stored immutably, and whenever the consent changes from yes to no, or the parties who have access, they change, an audit trail is maintained in the blockchain. So again, from a privacy point of view and from a legality point of view, that's a much better framework, and it benefits the citizen compared to what we have right now.
Sir, one
Yeah.
question that I would have here. So in terms of the implementation of this entire infrastructure, so would it be permission blockchain within the state or a nation?
Would you mind if we took the questions at the end? Is that okay? If we take it at the end? So just so that any questions that might be addressed, I'll be happy to take it if we take it at the end. Yeah.
Sure, sir, sure.
Yeah, thanks. So this is basically why governments need blockchain and what are the broad use cases they are looking at. Let's look at how evolution of implementation of blockchain has happened for governments. So between 2016 to 19 is when governments actually started getting into blockchain, right? So we saw a lot of governments realizing that there's a lot of potential in this technology. And we are lucky for the fact that India is one of the countries that very early acknowledged that blockchain will play an important role in governance in the future. And between 2016 to 19, you had a lot of governments that were chasing specific use cases or specific applications of blockchain. So, for example, Georgia, Sweden, and Andhra Pradesh in India tried to do land registry with blockchain. So, there's the city of Amravati in Andhra Pradesh actually still has a system where land registry is done using blockchain, right? So, anytime a land is bought and sold, it is recorded on a blockchain ledger. Singapore did a project called OpenCert, where they were securing the certificates from NUS, National University of Singapore, using blockchain, and they would provide a blockchain certified verifiability framework, which any authority can use to check if a certificate issued is valid or not. Similarly, Switzerland tried something with a project called UPOP, where they tried to build an identity framework leveraging the Ethereum blockchain. And that identity would act as a universal identity for accessing various services in Switzerland. USA, similarly, the state of Delaware tried out something very interesting with accounting. They tried to see if they can do triple entry accounting with blockchain. But at the end of 2019, all these governments that were working with these specific use cases, they realized that the potential of blockchain lies in the network effect, or bringing in more and more ecosystems into the application that you're trying to solve. So typically, if you focus on just one area of implementation, you are sort of shortening the net, right? You're making the net small. So you end up with one application that serves just one purpose. It does not evolve very well, and it might become redundant very soon. So instead of focusing on singular applications, maybe we should increase our scope. Maybe we should do something bigger. So this is just a summary of what we discussed till now. So the first is that what we have already discussed. But if you look at how they were implemented, so because this was before 2019, the platforms did not really have access to a lot of robust blockchain platforms to work with. So mostly they were working with forked versions of public blockchain stacks like Bitcoin or Ethereum. Network formation was based on a simple implementation or a single use case. Node custodians were just one entity. So if you're talking about land registration, typically just one government entity would be holding all the nodes, which is not really a very suitable model. Uh, Even though there were multiple nodes and hypothetically it was decentralized, because just one entity was owning all the nodes and often in the same infrastructure, in the same data center, the setup was very centralized. It was not really immutable. And if your data center went down, your blockchain went down. So it was not available as well. And scalability and extendability was limited. So beyond the use case that you were implementing, it was difficult to go beyond that, and you could not add more scenarios or you could not add more players. So this was the typical nature of these use cases. But there were also a lot of learnings from this. So they realized that the focus should be on synergies. So what are the common elements of these applications that we are trying to build? And how can we sort of make it uniform across the multitude of e-governance cases that we want to implement? And how can we have network effects? So how can we build a platform which would be suitable for everyone? And once they started adopting it, other parties would also come in, and the number of participants on our network will grow exponentially. They also focused on policy making and a long-term roadmap, because they realized that if we just build one application, it's a good showcase, but we need to plan how this technology will play a role in governance. And then going forward, as more and more stakeholders come into this network, so this could be startups, this could be the private sector, as they play a bigger and bigger role, uh, only then this platform will be robust and it will serve the purpose for which it was designed or it was built. They realized that they need to be technology agnostic, or they should have a multi-stack support. So commonly, which is called Internet of Blockchains, meaning that they realize we should not restrict ourselves just to private blockchains or public blockchains, or we should not restrict ourselves to a certain protocols. We should ideally just be building middleware that interacts with a number of protocols, and as and when required, depending on the use case, we can pick which blockchain protocol or platform we want to work with. They realized that there was merit in going for a hybrid approach, which means a private permission blockchain, but with public auditability. So if you look at a lot of government blockchains today, the way they are implemented is even if the nodes are held by parties that you know and trust, or rather, let's say government entities, the auditability is carried out on a public blockchain or in a manner where it cannot be questioned. So one good example is Estonia. What they do is they publish a snapshot of their blockchain ledger to all newspapers at a regular interval. So anytime in the future, if it is questioned that the transaction in the blockchain were tampered, you can go back and check what was the ledger snapshot at that date on the newspaper. And their argument is, since you are publishing it to so many newspapers, we can't go and change the data in all the newspapers. So you can trust that we are sort of decentralizing, your trust in us. We are taking it out of our control. It cannot be changed. Similarly, a lot of government applications that are implemented, they anchor the data that they have on public blockchains like Ethereum or like the Polygon POS chain, etc. The next, what they realize is, instead of building applications, we should focus on building reusable plug and play modules for application development. The reason being that if, let's say, I am focusing on a use case for securing land records or birth certificates, essentially digitized documents, I am going to get 1,000 use case for the same thing. So instead of trying to do it individually for every case that I get, what I should do is I should build one reusable module which can be used anytime I get a scenario where I have to secure digitized data and documents, right? So for that, they said, okay, instead of building these applications individually for each certificate, what we will do is we'll build a reusable module. So just to give you examples, we are building a module called the notarizer and verifier, which can be used for any type of certificate issued by the government. Similarly, BSI also has a notarizer of their own that they use for a similar purpose. And last is they started to focus on ecosystem development. So they started looking at building sandboxes so that the private sector can come and use their platforms. They started to build SDKs that can be used by startups for building applications. They started to focus on capacity building, so educating decision makers about blockchain, how it will make a difference, how businesses will change. They started to reach out to school students, college students, and working professionals and train them in the technology. And they also started to look at regulation and how it needs to change so that blockchain is adopted as something that is legally acceptable in terms of, let's say, land records, or let's say in terms of using a blockchain verified certificate for giving employment to someone, etc. So after 2019, the governments took these learnings into account, and they moved towards what is probably the next era of blockchain for governments. So you see a lot of interesting projects come at this time around the 2019 juncture. So the first is something called EBSI. EBSI stands for European Blockchain Initiative. Built by EU, and they have built this modular platform that uses Hyperledger Fabric and Hyperledger Besu. And their idea is that this platform, for the moment, will support four type of use cases. So identity use cases, digital notarization use cases, I think sharing of documents between entities, and education certificates. Like if you go and look at the architecture, you will see that there's a lot of plug-and-play modules such as key management, identity management, etc. And if you want to build an application on top, you can essentially use the microservices that are exposed from these modules and build your own application on top very easily. So it's a very flexible platform. You're not limited by what you can do, or rather, you can carry out a, mostly they're focusing on decentralization, and they have identified stakeholders across Europe who are hosting these nodes, and they hope that this will become the standard for governance going forward. Singapore also did something very interesting. So what started out as open search was quickly renamed into open attestation. So they realized that the stack had merits, and it could be used for a lot more use cases beyond just certificates. So the open attestation project actually allows you to anchor any kind of digitized documents on the public Ethereum blockchain, which could include land records, it can be identity documents, it can be certificates, any digitized document that you can think of. And the nodes are hosted by the academic institutes also. Almost all academic institutes from Singapore are participating in this initiative. Estonia is again a very interesting case. So this country has been in blockchain from, I think, around 2018, and they have blockchained a lot of their government registries, including right now they're carrying out voting on blockchain, but they've also put their identity registry on blockchain. They have put their enterprise registry on blockchain. So almost a lot of their very major uh, government registries are now on blockchain, and they are secure, and they maintain an audit trail. And if you have heard about the initiatives that Estonia has done, they're very futuristic in terms of how they have implemented this technology in governance. The last example is Dubai. So Dubai has similarly taken an ecosystem approach to implementing blockchain. So they are also looking at building middleware platforms which are interoperable with each other. They have come out with a policy that talks about procurement, that talks about what rules and regulations blockchain platforms that are being built as part of the city need to follow. And they've talked a little bit about the roadmap going forward. And this is our platform. We call it Nambike NAM. So we have also followed a similar approach. And when we started to do blockchain in Tamil Nadu, we realized that the e-governance projects that had been done till then, they were largely extinct and they were on their way out. They were mostly just showcase projects. So we wanted to build something that was robust and would run at least for the next 10 years. So we decided that instead of pursuing applications, what we would focus on is building a platform and then building applications using the various modules of the platform. So this is going live in the month of June. And we currently have some 7, 8 modules that are catering to a number of use cases, including document management, identity use cases, asset tracking, etc., etc. Uh, to complement the blockchain platform, we also have a policy in place which focuses on 4 areas. The first is capacity building of students, professionals, of various decision makers in the government. Second is we are focusing on infrastructure building, which so basically building a blockchain platform that can be used by various startups to build their application, which is Nambike NIM. The third is our focus is on updating the regulations. So even though everyone is doing blockchain, legally it needs to be acceptable, or whatever workflows you're building, legally it should be accepted by the law as something as an alternative to what has been done till now traditionally. So a good example is again land registration. So for land registration, you still need to physically be present at the registration office, provide your documents. Then the person will vet your documents. You'll get a photo taken. So a certain number of steps you have to follow, and only then a successful land registration can happen. Whereas if you move to a blockchain system, you could probably do this remotely with a certain number of checks and balances in place, right? So to enable this, we are focusing on and the last thing we are focusing on is ecosystem development. So for blockchain to be adopted successfully, and for decision makers even outside of the government to understand how this technology will make a change and how they need to think about businesses going forward, we need to have a lot of more conversations between them and between startups, and to enable through our policy, we try to bring startups and these enterprises together, get them to have conversations, get them to discuss how their current manufacturing process can become better, or currently how they are recruiting that can become better using blockchain. And yeah, that's about it. So that is Nambike name. That is the way we are proceeding with blockchain. So let's just quickly look at what are some of the inputs that went into our design for the platform, and then quickly I'll just give you a summary of the platform. So Tamil Nadu, as you might be aware, is one of the largest states in India. Around 8 lakh students graduate annually, and around 9 lakh college students in 2021. Around 3 lakh jobs were added in 2021. It has the second highest GDP in the country. There's a lot of high mobile internet, broadband internet, and smartphone penetration, which is 41.6% in the rural areas, right? Which means that it's one of the highest in the countries. More than 200 government to government and government to business services are delivered online, which means that you don't need to walk into a government office to get that service. You can get it from the comfort of your home. And this makes the state very suitable for delivering the next layer, or the next level of e-governance services, which means that services that are supported by blockchain. Because there's smartphone penetration, you know that a majority of the population for whom you're building these applications will be able to access the service that you're building through their smartphone or through broadband internet. Because you have a large number of graduates who are coming out every year and then applying for jobs around India and even going abroad. That means that there is a requirement for a system which allows these students, and which allows these potential employees to get their credentials verified without physically carrying their documents. Especially now, when you look at remote work, that becomes more important. Since the GDP is the highest, that means that you have a slightly more affluent class of people that would be interested in trying out this next level of governance, rather than still focusing on some of the more essential things that a government needs to do. So these things makes the state ripe for implementing such blockchain enabled services. So the case for blockchain intervention. So where can blockchain play a big role in the state? So first is secure education and demographic certificates. So in Tamil Nadu, apart from academic credentials, we also issue a lot of demographic certificates, such as what is your native, what is the community you come from, what is your economic status, etc. On the basis of that, the government will give certain benefits to you. So to deliver these services in a paperless and secure manner, blockchain can play an important role for securing any kind of government documents and data. So a good example is land transactions and titles, or even website portals, etc., which have digitized data, and the data can be changed by malicious parties very easily. They can be secured with blockchain. Tracking provenance of physical and virtual assets. So physical, we have something called a sawmill license in Tamil Nadu, which is issued to an entity that is running a sawmill, so wood cutting mill. And this license typically changes hands. So you need to maintain a provenance as to who the current owner is, who the previous owner was, and you need to make sure that two entities are not owning the license at the same point of time. So in cases like DVA, where you can securely keep a track of who the current owner is, who the previous owner was, and maintain an audit trail in the future as well. Similarly, we have warehouse receipts, which are typically, we have warehouse receipts, which are typically, they change hands between various parties, so they can often be fake, or some party can take the warehouse receipt and claim some sort of a commission claim some sort of a receipt. So in cases like these, blockchain becomes very important. We are also looking at physical assets. So there's a lot of legacy animal products, such as animal trophies, things made from animal carpets, which were created when hunting was legal in India. But that is not supposed to happen now. They're not supposed to be traded. So what we can do is, can we create a registry of these legacy animal products or animal trophies, so that they cannot be bought and sold illegally, right? They are only supposed to be with the owner, who has the last possession of these goods. Fourth is for secure identity. So like we discussed earlier, for consent and privacy, governance and delivery of schemes and benefits, which we discussed earlier. So schemes and benefits can be pensions, scholarships, license renewal. So all of these are essentially services for which citizens currently have to come to the government to get access to the service. So this is our platform. This is a high-level architecture of the platform. So we call it Nambika in a platform in Tamil. And the way the system works is, at top, you have the legacy department applications. So these are IT applications that departments have been running for a long time, essentially Web2 applications that have data stored in silos or in a single repository. Typically, the blockchain network will interact with these applications through an API gateway, and it will either secure the data, or it will give an API through which someone can check the reliability of the digitized data. You also have UI/UX, so which is essentially a set of applications that a lot of these department employees can use for checking the data or viewing the data that is stored to the blockchain. Business adapters and modules are essentially a middleware layer that we are building on top of an existing L1 protocol. So currently we are working with Hyperledger Fabric, and we are using the Hyperledger Fabric platform. On top of that, we are adding a middleware of our own with these reusable modules that anyone can use for building their applications on top. What you see in the yellow layer is essentially the actual blockchain protocol. So, like I mentioned, we are working with Hyperledger Fabric, and this blockchain protocol serves various purposes. So, it acts as a certificate anchor for securing decentralized certificates. It can be used for physical and virtual asset tracking. It can act as a document anchor for any documents beyond certificates, and it can securely capture and manage consent of the citizens. Along with this, we also have a policy and a sandbox in place. So a policy, like I mentioned earlier, essentially complements this platform and ensures there's capacity building. There are startups using this platform, and the sandbox is essentially a set of APIs which can be used by any startup or any private sector, and to access this platform and build on top. So that's really our platform, and the sort of guiding principles for us are that we want it to be an evolving architecture and always have a modular framework. So tomorrow, if a new set of use cases need to be addressed, we can just add a new module on top. We also don't want to restrict ourselves to any protocol. So tomorrow, if we want to work with Polygon, we want to work with Ethereum, our middleware can easily integrate with this protocol. We can support multiple blockchain platforms. The modules are a combination of smart contracts as well as off-chain business logic, and they can be used for multiple use cases. So if you talk about something like the notarizer, it has an off-chain layer that hashes documents and that does queuing of the documents, and it has an on-chain layer that secures these hash signatures to the blockchain, right? So a module is not just like contained in one spot. It comprises of a off-chain component as well as an on-chain component. The platform will be hosted across government servers as well as secure private clouds, because we want participation from other entities in the future, especially entities like academic institutions like IITs, Anna University, etc., other trusted institutions. And participants who are unable to host a node can access the platform through an API gateway. So a BaaS, a blockchain as a service model. And for this, we'll make a SDK available to entities so they can build their own application. Beyond just government data and documents, tomorrow, if you need to secure any data with the platform, you can simply write a small application and call the service, and you can secure the data on our blockchain platform. And last is, we'll provide a sandbox to startups for custom app development. So please come, please use this platform, and with access controls, you can access some of the data that is also being secured with this platform, and you can build your own custom software on top. So we are implementing this project in two phases. Our phase one is we are focusing more on building the platform. So we are focusing more on simple use cases. So simple use cases such as securing certificates and securing IDs, which are non-transferable assets. So I don't have to worry about the provenance of these assets. And we are also looking at consent management. So securely capturing consent from the citizens. In phase two, which will be the start of the next year, we'll be looking at provenance of transferable assets. So these can be physical or virtual assets like licenses, GI tag products, receipts, land titles, etc. We are also looking at proactive governance workflows going forward. Yeah, so these are essentially the broad use cases in phase one and phase two. I'll just pause here for a minute if you want to see. And some of the challenges and decision points that we have is, first is obviously, for any blockchain protocol, adoption by stakeholders and the ecosystem is very important. And for that, we are focusing on our policy, and we are reaching out to stakeholders initially in the government and get them to build on top. And then eventually, maybe going forward, we also reach out to startups and the private sector for building on top. We want to make sure that whatever portals we are building are user friendly, and we want to address the digital divide. So anyone who is not able to access this platform either through a smartphone or through a laptop, how do they work with the applications built on top of this platform? So for example, can we give like a community kiosk where they can come and access the applications? Can we build like nodes that remain offline and store some data, and then when they connect, they again post the data back to the ledger? Can we build like a digest of their wallets, of their identity wallets, which can be used as verification? So it can be printed as a piece of paper with a QR, and wherever required, they can just carry that piece of paper. And the third is regulatory acceptance and compatibility with privacy laws. So one of the biggest challenges we struggle with is a right to forget. So we are trying to build a platform where tomorrow, if the personal data protection bill comes into being, and there's a citizen who comes and says, I don't want to use the platform, and please remove my credentials from the platform, we should be able to do so. So that is how we are building the platform, and there already been some interesting work done around the same. And obviously, we also have some of the common challenges. So first is, we are dealing with a large population, right? So Tamil Nadu has a population of 80 million people. So we have questions like, how do we do key management? How do we do identity management? How do we do do we do key distribution? Does everyone have a key? We make this application scale so you can address all public sector entities in the state and their customers, etc., etc. Second is ledger data classification. So what data on the ledger needs to be public data and what needs to be private? What sort of access controls need to be in place? And what data can the entities that are later onboarded to the platform, what can they access or what can they not access? Security is definitely an ongoing challenge for us. And fourth is making it future proof so that tomorrow you don't have a technology that can come and break the platform and render it useless. So these are some of the challenges and decision points that we have. So we also have a few other blockchain initiatives. So we have done a few pilots and POCs around automated verification of academic and demographic data for admission counseling. We have done a POC for tracking website defamation in government portals. So a lot of cases, what happens is that a malicious party will come and inject a script, or they will come and defame a website. And typically, a lot of government entities will not get to know this has happened until a few weeks later. So we did a POC to see if we can track this in real time and notify the website administration. And in terms of policy, we worked on the Tamil Nadu blockchain policy, which focuses on ecosystem development, as well as we hosted a remote voting workshop for the election commission, where they explored if they can use blockchain for voting. So that's about us. If you would want to know a bit more about blockchain, especially in the finance space, so I have a book called Blockchain Development for Finance Projects. You can check that out. So that's all from my side. Happy to take any questions that are there.
Sure, sir. Thank you very much for that informative talk. And it's very great. What is your vision of how?
I'm sorry, I just lost you there. I think there was an internet problem. I couldn't hear the question.
Is it any better now?
Yeah, it's better now. Yeah.
Sure. So, what phase is this project in currently? Has this been developed? Has this been deployed? And what kind of adoption you are seeing, and how do you see it evolving in time?
So we are currently deploying our phase 1, and we'll go live by the month of June. We are essentially in the last stages right now, right? So we are just doing our last due diligence, and we are planning to launch just in the next month. The current phase, we are looking at very simple use cases, because one of the biggest challenges, we need to build a secure and scalable platform, right? So we are looking at use cases that are proven, that people have done already, because we know how to implement it. And our major focus right now is only about making sure the platform is scalable, cannot be toyed with, and especially the user experience for the citizen is something that they are able to understand. It's not very complicated for them, right? So I hope that answers your question.
Sure, sir. And so now I believe other governments must also be trying to implement this. So what is your take on the application of this technology for the entire nation? And
so there is already a strategy document that was published by MIT. So they published the first iteration, I think, 3 years back now. And when we came out with our blockchain policy, we had also consulted with them, and we again contributed back to their policy. So we are credited as one of the people who have contributed to the national blockchain strategy as well. So if you look at their approach, they are also following a similar approach only, where they are also building this network which they're saying will be run by the centralized government, and other state departments will connect to them. And more or less, I would say most governments have this vision in place right now, because they understand it's a network technology and there's no use to just addressing one use case at a time. I think other states are also trying out a few applications. I hear Karnataka is doing very interesting things, and they have a very visionary roadmap in terms of what they want to do with the technology. Definitely Telangana and Maharashtra are also doing a lot of interesting projects around this. Telangana probably holds the record for having two very interesting use cases that are already live. One is something they're doing with securing chit fund societies and doing settlement for chit fund societies. Second is they have secured the land records of a district in Telangana called Shamshabad. So similarly, Maharashtra is also recently a district has secured 30,000 caste certificates. So at a small scale, a lot of governments are doing a lot of interesting things. What we are rolling out is at a slightly more larger level, and thus our challenge is more to make sure it works and it doesn't break, right? Because if it's a bad experience, then it's difficult to get citizens back and make sure they use the application.
Right, sure. So if someone in the audience would have a question, I'll let them.
Yeah, hello, Ishan.
Hey,
Great
hi,
to
Kishore. How are you doing?
yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for asking. So great to see. I'm also from Tamil Nadu. I can see that Tamil Nadu is pioneering in in blockchain among the other states. Great to see that. So I wanted to understand. So I guess I have attended your previous talk in that you have mentioned that June we'll be going in phase one. Now also you mentioned that in June we are going in phase live in phase one. So I wanted to understand, since even we are also from a blockchain company, right? So if at all we wanted to develop any application, so when will be the sandbox be open so that company like us can come and participate? So I
So
wanted to understand.
definitely this year, unfortunately, what has happened is because we have a lot of moving variables to work with, right? So first you have to make sure the platform works correctly and it's a good experience. And then the sandbox that you will get would be a replica of this platform. So
Yeah,
initially you would just get access to probably the technology framework as in the application itself. And then subsequently, if policies are in place, you might get access to the data as well. So the advantage of that would be today, if you look at any startup who wants to build a blockchain application in the education space, right? So you have to go and onboard each college one by one and get access to their data and then build a certificate application or build a scholarship application, right? The advantage you would get with our platform is that data would already be there and it could be provided to you with access controls. So your hurdle of going to each entity and onboarding them is reduced. You plug into our platform and you will directly get access to that data with the user's consent and with suitable access control. So it becomes much easier for you. Plus, because it's a trusted blockchain infrastructure run by the government, that is an added bonus, right? Because typically you would have to build your own network and onboard parties, which can be, challenging.
yeah. Okay, great. So one more question. So you were mentioning, right? So right to be forgotten. So if blockchain, we all know that it's just append only, right? So once the data gets uploaded, so I do understand all the data will be stored in the off chain. So even if it is off chain, like how will we solve the right to be forgotten?
So there are two ways to approach this, or rather, there it depends on the data that you are storing. So a lot of transaction data, which is not personal data, like land records and land transactions, right? Typically, the way we do it is we implement channels where only the parties that need to have access to the data have access to that data, and in that case, that data is immutable, cannot be changed, etc. In also consent management, right? Because that is you need to keep a consent record. In terms of personal data, what we are doing is there's a very interesting approach that was followed by Samsung for an insurance use case that they did in Korea. So
Okay.
this was done on Hyperledger Fabric. So we are following a similar approach where you essentially give a pseudonymous identity that you can derive from the person's details, but from the pseudonymous identity, I cannot find out who you are.
Yeah,
So what we would do is, if let's say you do invoke a right to forget, I will delete the off-chain record. But if let's say in the future for audit purpose, it needs to be tracked that if your insurance claim was processed or you were given a native certificate, etc., that can be done. I can again get the data from you. I can track it back. So
okay.
until now, that's the best solution that we have also found.
So
Right?
only in
Because
the off
obviously,
chain, we'll be able to delete, but in on chain we'll be having that proof of this particular person.
correct, yeah, yeah. So it's a pseudonymous identity that I can derive from your data. But if I don't have your data, I cannot find out who you are.
Okay, and going forward, so if at all we are using blockchain for all the government services, we would be ended up having a lot of data that is coming from the citizen. So that eventually will be handled off chain, right?
So see, one of the things I think a lot of a lot of these government departments already have these legacy applications of workflows, right? For which they plan to run at least for the next 5 years, 6 years. So our approach also mostly now is to add on a feature to these legacy applications. So we are like an additional feature. We are not trying to replace them. In certain cases where software has reached end of its life or there's a new application to be built, there we intervene with blockchain and we make sure blockchain is a core part of the platform right from day zero itself. Right. So I hope that answers your question, right? Or is there?
Yes. So yeah, so we are also building something towards academic
Sure.
institute. Soon we would be able to collaborate and we would be able to do
Definitely, happy to. Yeah.
Thank you.
About ideas as well. So we are a Hyperledger certified organization, and one project that we're working on currently is with AICT. It's called
Okay.
Bharat Network, and we are building an educational blockchain within all the universities of India, and
Oh, interesting.
on the ground as of this moment. So I think
Interesting.
there's definitely a lot of scope for the company ideas and for the government.
Definitely. Yeah.
Definitely something that can be explored. So, but
Sure.
and so thank you very much, Ishan, for
Thank you.
a very insightful talk. And it's very good to know that Indian government is taking such initiatives for emerging technologies. And we would like to definitely continue this knowledge sharing with you.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishan. Thank you so much for your time.